Boom. Recording started. All right. Welcome to the March Tribal Cafe. This is, I think, the fourth or the fifth. We're really rolling on with these. Um, and we got a couple of athletes on the line here. We got Cameron and Trevor, two guys on the Zion squad. We got four of the 10 Zion athletes here between myself and Goldstein. Looks like we've got Grant Warren popping in as well. Thank you guys for being here. Main theme that we're going to get into today is around this idea of building momentum and using boundaries to build momentum, establish momentum, maintain momentum. Huge theme on the team that we saw in February was guys just wanting to be a little bit more consistent than maybe they had been. And I think that we can read. I was thinking this a couple of minutes ago, Goldstein. Now that we're into March here, I was thinking February. February can be renamed to something along the lines of like just fucking stay in the fight, February, something like that. The New Year's resolutions have worn off a little bit. The New Year's zest has worn off, and the weather still sucks. It's still cold. The days are short, and it's the time when a lot of people just waver a little bit in their commitments. And so that's what we'll be getting into today. Without just spilling all the beans, Goldstein, you want to say what's up?
Team, what is going on? Yeah, we need something for February, like stick it out February, or like just like eke it out February.
I like stay in the
Just
fight. I think we need another F. So stay in the fight, February.
stay in the fight. You're better with the alliterations than I am, that's for sure. Stay in the fight February. Yeah, because it's something that I've intuitively sort of been feeling ever since I've been this embrace the winter kind of a person. And that was kicked off by like literally reading books from the 19th century of all these Canadian sports promoters and talking about how amazing the winter is and how invigorating it is and how the only way you can really make it through, a harsh Canadian winter is to meet that misery in the middle and make it your companion in sport. Um, and this year, in the tribe, in my own group, with my own coaching clients, like I've noticed everybody is crashing in February. Like it's not even like this slow downward. It's like people are falling off. And so I'm really excited to talk today about, reestablishing momentum and how boundaries and focusing on this idea of boundaries is really a way for us to bounce back, but also to ensure that when everybody else is falling off, late January, coming into February, that we are actually priming ourselves for success, to not have that fall off that everybody else is experiencing.
Yeah, and it's cool also to see like within the team, people's idea of losing momentum or not showing up the way that they want to. It's like their baseline is still very elevated compared to where it had been in the past. So it's like, okay, well, falling off and losing momentum might just look like two or three sessions getting sporadically done throughout the week, right? Not hitting all five or all six that you've got. Very rarely is it just nothing getting done. But yeah, excited to chat here. I mean, some of the timelines that we're on right now for the team. So we're about 5 weeks out from Zion 100s. We've got 10 athletes prepping for that. And then we are about I think 9 weeks out from Chattanooga 70.3, and we've got about 10, I think 11 athletes doing Chattanooga 70.3. And I really like the momentum conversation directed towards those folks because we've got a bunch of first timers in that group. Grant is here on the call, thinking about Matt Dalton as well, thinking about my dad. Um, and in this kind of first build to a 70.3, like this February month where we're 13 to 9 weeks out ish, really holding on and making sure like, okay, we can't get through this month with nothing going down. Like we're close enough to a race that like we need to really start to make sure the work is being put in. And this idea of boundaries just showed up a ton for the team. Um, so do you want to like kick off how we're going to be chatting about this, or just some early ideas?
Yeah, I guess like the early idea when we're talking about boundaries is that this isn't a limited idea. This is a really powerful and expansive idea, and it's actually built off of some of the things that you and I conceptually got into in our summit back in January, um, and how really like creating hard boundaries around our practices, our habits, but also our mindset really is the way for us to drive towards momentum and to find success in training um, in ways that allow us to, how do I want to put this? To hit all the positives that we want to hit, right? We don't want training to take away from who we're trying to become, from what we're doing with our families, what we're doing in our careers, sort of these bigger life moves that a lot of us are finding are happening concurrently with training for these big races. Um, and without boundaries, we tend to lose ourselves in a process, to a process, and to an ideal of a process that maybe when we look back, oops, the idea we had in our mind actually didn't turn out in reality because we weren't strict enough with the boundaries that we're placing around time, energy, habits, work, life, all these different things that sort of distract us, take away our energy, or move us away from sticking to the plan and being accountable to what we've set out to do with these races and with these training plans.
I like this idea of like physical boundaries on time, but then also like mental boundaries. So, physical boundaries on time, I think, would start with like the container with which you're training. And this is the easiest way for people to have massive energy leaks is if they don't have an identified time that they're training, and if they're just thinking it's going to happen mid morning, if I get a work break, oh, work didn't let me get away. I'm going to do it at lunch. Oh, I wasted 10 minutes scrolling on my phone. Now all of a sudden I don't have the full allotment of time to do the run. Maybe I'm going to do it in the evening. Oh, I had to stay at work late. Now my family needs me. Now it doesn't get done. Right. So without a clear identified container for training, without that boundary, right, that all of a sudden becomes a massive waste of mental energy. So I think that a couple of really good examples on the team are certainly Matt Bank. Trevor, I actually haven't heard on your specific time boundary, but I know that you just knock out training like every morning. So you would be in this group as well. But Matt Bank and John Herman are two really great examples of like, they get up at, I think it's like 4:30 for Matt Bank. I think it's about 5 for John Herman, but it's like
I was
they
up at three
know.
today.
Up at 3 today for Trevor. He's
Yeah.
got the manual labor gig. He's on the Louis protocol, so Louis would be in this group as well. But I think that when we're establishing this, like it's very easy to say, oh, just get up at 4:30, but no, like let's like reverse engineer that. Like, why do these guys get up then? Well, because their responsibilities as a father, they start at like 7, right? I think that's when John Herman said that like that's when his kids get up and that's when he needs to be done. So, okay, well, let's just work backwards from that, right? It's not like we just have this mindset of, oh, gotta wake up at 4 a.m., right? It's like, no, man, that's the container with which we can train. So that would be one on the physical sense. Um, the other thing that you and Goldstein, you and I have gotten really good at over the past couple of years, and today was a great example of it, is like really having one thing lead right into the next in life. Like you and I, we just chatted for 5 minutes at like 8:50, catching up on something. And it's like, what were you doing? You were driving home from an in-person thing. I was in the middle of cleaning up Jack's breakfast and getting Jack down for his 9 a.m. nap. And it was like, we both had like a minute to go before this kicked off. Right. And like, there is another side to that where it's like, okay, well, you don't want to have no space in your day where you are unconsciously rolling in from one thing to the next. But on like the positive side, it's like there's a real art to just being like, this is what I'm doing in this exact time window. And immediately in the next time window, I'm getting into something else. So before going into like mental uh boundaries, you have anything to share on that? While I hear Jack squeaking a little bit, I'm gonna go reset his bank as I am on solo dad duty here.
Yeah, no, that's all good. In terms of like these physical barriers around time, the most important thing to appreciate is that each of our schedules are different. Each one of our responsibilities outside of ourselves are different. So just because somebody is getting up early, that works for them, but maybe for someone, that container, that time container, it's an after work kind of thing. Um, so what's important when thinking about boundaries and establishing those physical boundaries around time is really working with what you have in your schedule and being open to communicating with the people who are relying on you about cordoning off or marking off a physical space. And it's difficult to do in the beginning, but it's something that once you establish it with those people who you are responsible to, it becomes a much easier, let's say, negotiation. And then all of a sudden, it's not even a negotiation. It's just part of the weekly routine in your house. So, for example, Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, I'm out going for my long trail run at sunrise. This is something that I had established before I had kids, so that my wife, she already knows like one day on the weekend, I'm going out. And when I get that time to be able to go out for a longer run and to do it at a time when I'm not able to do it during the week, I am a much happier, I'm a more fulfilled person. I'm able to hit the responsibilities that I have around the house, and it was something that wasn't taken away from me when I had kids, right? So this was something that was in the schedule based off of a routine that I had been establishing for years and years and years. And then we kept that boundary around that time for me. And then that meant I had to shift around other things. So it's like if I want to have a physical space on my calendar just for me to go out and do longer training, I also have to make sure that I'm backfilling that with the obligations and responsibilities that I'm sort of removing myself from uh, in those moments. So if we want to establish boundaries that work for us and the people that are we're responsible to, making it a habit is really important because then it's a standard part of just our week as a family in the house. But also becomes this way for you to, all right, if you give me this time, I'm able to now give this. And maybe that's a trade-off between you and your partner, where maybe they're not training, but they want to sleep in or they want to go on a coffee date with their friends in the morning. It's like, great, you give me my space, I'll give you yours. Everybody is going to have their obligations and responsibilities fulfilled, and I'm going to be getting what I need to based on the training and whatever race it is that I'm coming up to. So it's difficult at the beginning, but if you establish it as a routine and a habit, it just becomes part of your day to day, your week to week, your month to month, and it's less resistance when it comes to creating that boundary, for the physical time that we need to get this stuff done.
Yeah, I love taking this conversation into the direction of like how you actually present this to like your wife, for example, because of course it's not always just going to work where it's just like, okay, well, I'm training at this exact time. It's like, okay, well, you've got kids, you've got a wife, you've got other responsibilities. And so, one thing that I have seen amongst a couple of guys in the team who are trying to show up as better leaders in the home, is it's really around how this stuff is presented, and it's really around presenting solutions. So let's think about how to not have this go well, and then we'll reverse engineer it to think about how we can have this go well. So to not have this go well, let's say, some of these guys doing Chattanooga, like they need to be riding their bike for 2 or 3 hours on the weekends. They've got a 70.3 coming up. This bike ride is going to take them 4 hours in the race. Like they need to be training like this. The way to not have this implemented successfully in life is to say to their wife, hey, I have to do this. Can I do it at this time on Saturday? And like really tiptoe around and like look for permission. Really what we want to be doing is we want to be flipping that, and we really want to be stepping into like our power as a leader in the home. And I'm skewing this from my perspective as just like the man stepping into the masculine identity. But the masculine identity, it really thrives when it has three things: when it has mission, purpose, and direction. So everybody on the team right now, if they're training towards something, they have a mission, right? Like your mission is Chattanooga 70.3. Why are you doing Chattanooga 70.3? Okay, well, this goes back to the maze of meaning, right? This is purpose. My purpose for doing Chattanooga 70.3 is that I want to break through and break free in my fitness, and I want to be living out as an example of an active lifestyle to the family. I want to be an example of commitment and discipline and setting a goal and striving for more, right? And the direction that I need to head in order to achieve that is doing this 2 or 3 hour ride, right? So that's like the psychology of what's going on in the mind as we're presenting this. And then when we show up and we're talking to our wife, it's this is what I want to do, and this is how it's going to work for our family, because I'm going to show up in this other area or at this other time to relieve you or to really hold my weight in balance with the fact that I'm going to need to be out of commission for 2 or 3 hours or whatever it is. And so it's this idea of just like stepping up and then giving your spouse or your wife just permission to just relax into your plan and to say, okay. And then all of a sudden, when you're talking about it's challenging in the beginning, well, it's only challenging until your significant other sees the value in what you're doing, right? Like your wife has no issue with you going out on a trail run because that fuels your spirit. When you show back up, you're a way better dad, right? You're fulfilled, right? You're ready to step into that role. And it's the same exact thing in my house with Chelsea, right? Like I have to go do that kind of stuff, right? Because that's what's fueling me, right? Riding my bike for 3 or 4 or even 5 hours if it's an Ironman build, right? But then when I show back up, it's like we said a few minutes ago, like, okay, well, I got a couple minutes to decompress, maybe stretch out a little bit, but like I'm right into dad duty. I don't need an hour to lay around until all of a sudden I'm being asked to step up. Right. And it's like these different orbiting things when we're creating boundaries. It's like we need to create that container, but we're only going to get that container if we present it in this certain way and if we show up in a certain way outside of that container.
Yeah, I love this. What's so important to recognize, and this is why boundaries are such a, it's not just what you think it is. It's so much bigger. Boundaries are related to freedom and responsibility, right? If we don't place a boundary, so we've got the example of like you've got, like a wife and kids, but what about somebody who's like, I live by myself, I ain't got no family, I ain't got any other external obligations or external responsibilities other than maybe like my work, but otherwise, like I've got total freedom over my schedule. Well, without boundaries, freedom is chaos, right? If we don't have rules, if we don't have guidelines, if we don't have some kind of a way to regulate that schedule, then we're never going to be able to stick with anything. It's too many choices. I could do it in the morning. I could do it at lunch. I could do it afternoon. I could do it after my dinner. Like I could do it at all times. And then when you don't really pick which one is going to be your time, you end up not doing it. Too much freedom, too much choice is chaos, right? I always use the example of our field of vision, right? So our eyes are very important in giving us information about the world around us, but our eyes are also expert in filtering out what we don't need to see. So I don't need to see 100% of the spectrum of light for me to be able to go about my day. And in fact, my eyes can't sense 99% of light if you're thinking about the electromagnetic spectrum. A better way to even think about this, everybody has a nose right in the middle of their face, right in the middle of your field of vision. But do you ever see your nose? No. Even if I try to consciously look and focus on my nose, it's hard. I actually have to close one of my eyes in order to do it because expertly, my brain is deciding for me. I don't need to know that a nose is there. It's in the way of what I really need to see. So this boundary is created around the total chaos of all the stimulus, all the information that I could possibly get in through all my senses. It would be so overwhelming to me that I wouldn't be able to act. I would actually be paralyzed and I would be frozen in place. So boundaries around total choice gives us, right, the necessary framework in order to act towards what we need. Too much information, too much freedom is total chaos. And so boundaries are crucial in tying us to responsibility that is on the other end of the freedom that we want. It's like, I want the freedom to go out and ride for 2 to 3 hours. It's like, yeah, of course, we all want that. But that has to come with responsibility on the other side. They're the same. Freedom and responsibility are the same thing. Otherwise, it's just total chaos, or it's just too much rigidity and structure, right, in our lives. So we can't be totally ruled by a schedule, right, where it's not working with the other people in our lives, or it's really not even working with us. But then at the same time, we can't have total freedom either. We have to create these boundaries around ourselves so we have direct action, as you say, direction, right? Boundaries give us that direction that you were talking about, Ryan. Otherwise, we could decide to go wherever we wanted.
The two things that are sticking out to me about what you're saying there is like clarity and certainty. So it's like we need to be very clear about what it is that we're trying to do, right? Trying to ride for 2 or 3 hours, 2 hours and 30 minutes as I'm thinking about some of these specific rides that I'm giving these guys. 2 hours and 26 minutes, actually, if we're getting exact on the ERG prescribed intervals. I'm looking to ride for 2 hours and 26 minutes. And I'm dead certain that that's what I'm about to do. Right? Like this wavering. How do boundaries not get established? When there's wavering, when there's uncertainty, when it's, oh, well, what about this? Like, no, we need to lead ourselves and our home and step up. And those were just the two things that were sticking out to me. But the other thing I wanted to get into a little bit is how there's this idea of like alive time versus dead time. And this is a little bit what we touched on a moment ago, but it's like the easiest way to not make progress towards an important goal like this, like any of these races or any of this character development, is to have like this dead time of 30 minutes that's just wasted between all of your activities throughout the day. Right. Like it's 10 minutes of scrolling. It's then I'm going to grab a little bit of a snack. Then it's, all of a sudden 20 minutes went by. And then since 20 minutes went by, now my window's closed and now I can't do anything else. And now you're like constricted and you're like restricted. Right. But again, like being clear and being certain, right, about what you're doing, like this is like the energy we're trying to bring to every single thing that we do. Right. And it doesn't mean that we don't slip up, right? It doesn't mean that I'm not scrolling on my phone sometimes when I'm like hanging with Jack or he's just pounding around on the floor, right? But it's like this idea of like in the mode of doing and being immersed into the activity. That's like what I work to lean in on most. It's like I'm not necessarily trying to multitask with every single different thing that I'm doing, right? Because then I'm distracted, I'm unclear, my foundation is shaken. Um, so yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, like creating a boundary around your focus, creating a boundary around my attention. It's like when I'm involved in any activity that's on my schedule, I want to be present in that activity. And sometimes dead space is what we need to transition. So just as, I walked in from my car, made a coffee, logged onto my computer within 5 minutes of me getting home to get onto this, sometimes a little dead space is what we need to decompress. And that doesn't mean that we need sort of like the full hour, maybe after a long effort before I can go in and be dad. But it is also this recognition that transitions in between different spaces are important. And sometimes that's a minute. We just need to be conscious. And I only have a minute to transition. And something that I like to do is just like pause, a couple of deep breaths, This idea of buffer zones is really good from moving from one space to the other, but recognizing that the time is flexible within that transition. So sometimes we don't have a lot, sometimes maybe we're afforded a little much. And you're talking about that, how does an hour dwindle down to like 20 minutes? I'm the master of that. I am the master of that when it comes to getting my non-endurance related exercise in. So if it's like jump rope or body weight exercises or steel mace or steel club, and I've got an hour to do it, I never, I never get the full hour because I'm the biggest procrastinator when it comes to that. There's just this giant resistance I have to these modes of exercise, and something that I want to work on. But whenever I have an hour, I always find myself now, oops, I only got my 30 minutes, which means, oops, now I can only do my 20-minute workout, which those serve me really well. But I at least have that awareness to be like, the minimum amount of time for me to get what I need to do on the schedule is 25 minutes. So if I've got 45 minutes, maybe it's okay to piss some of them away. But if I coming up to that like 30 minutes, that's go time. That's the firm boundary. And I never put up zeros. Like I never put up zeros because I understand that the minimum amount that I need is still on the table for me. And I never put myself in such a position that I can't at least get that, even if it's not the maximal or the optimal amount. I at least am aware, self-aware enough to recognize these, what would we call them? These little sabotaging patterns. Um, but I never let that boundary become diffuse. So the boundary to start is always there, and I'm always making sure that that's the one that I'm not letting waver. But you were talking about that, and I was like, "Oh, you're just describing me. Thanks, that's great."
Well, I think that one thing, like a tactical, to bring this to like some tactical training type stuff, is like not allowing the 45-minute run need to be like an hour and 15-minute production because you're racing around the house for 15 minutes trying to grab all your stuff. Where's my this? My water bottle's dirty. Where are my shoes? I don't have any clean socks. Like this is part of the setup type stuff that can make boundaries very effective. So maybe that's what I'm thinking on now is like, okay, well, a boundary isn't really effective if you're not doing the work on the front end to set it up for success. And that training example would be one tactical thing. But another thing that stuck out with some guys on the team over the past month is the value in an evening routine to have them set up for success the next morning. So everybody focuses right on what's the morning routine, right? The magic morning routine. But the easiest way to not have a morning go well, whether it's training or otherwise, is to be sitting on your phone, just like doom scrolling on the couch until it's 30 minutes past your bedtime. You have no idea what your workout is for tomorrow. None of your gear is laid out. All of a sudden, you're just going to bed, and then you're not set up for success to wake up when your alarm goes off, and the whole thing falls apart because you haven't really done the front end work to establish or really set that boundary up for success. I want to share on like a real life example of some boundaries that are really serving me right now. So, um, first of all, there's just nothing like being a few weeks out from a race, man. You just get dialed on everything. So we're like 5 weeks out from Zion right now, and it's just like, all right, man, stretching and mobility's got to be dialed. The training sessions need to be hit to perfection. The nutrition around the clock has got to be dialed. The sleep has got to be dialed because all of a sudden, if any of this is falling apart, then the whole thing's going to start to crumble. So like I'm in that mode right now, and I just love feeling like that. And maybe one day I'll be like that around the whole calendar year. But for me, it's like phase into it when we're getting close to a race, and it just feels awesome. And so one of the boundaries that I am really, really feeling a lot of momentum with is this boundary of 3 hours between meals. And this is really helping me just get better in tune with like my true hunger related to training. And it's also giving me some good it's setting me up to have good boundaries around just like my weight control and how I want to get into physical form heading into this race. So, um, hands up for me. We're in the trust tree here a little bit. I like floated up on weight a good bit after the new year. And it's all these little tricks that I realized happen in my mind. Like one of my learning lessons coming out of Ironman Florida was that since I wasn't always doing morning training, just the way that my schedule was going, I was falling into the habit of intermittent fasting without really thinking about it, waiting till noon or so to eat, which at the time was very easy for me, but not conducive to Ironman training and being well fueled and recovering well. So even though that race went really well for me, I'm like, oh, that's an area that I can improve on. So I started doing this thing where I was having like this like caloric coffee with like these mushroom supplements. I was having some like protein in it. It's like 200 calories, nothing crazy, but some calories at 6 or 7 a.m., which I don't usually have. And all of a sudden, without really thinking about it, that led to me basically eating like every couple of hours. So I'd have the morning coffee, which is 200 calories. Then 2 hours later, I'd have breakfast. Then at 11 a.m., I'd have some kind of snack. Then I'd maybe train midday. Then I'd have my larger meal post training. Then I'd be nibbling on something at like 4 or 5. And then we'd have dinner at like 7 or 6. And it's like, holy crap, man, I'm eating around the fucking clock. And so my weight drifted up like 10 pounds. And I also have been strength training a ton more. So there is a little bit of muscle mass put on there, but I can tell you I didn't put on 10 pounds of muscle. And so one of the things as I'm coming into Zion is like, shit, man, I want to be dialed in here. So a good boundary for me and just a good example right now in my nutrition is 3 hours between meals. And like, hey, man, that holds me accountable. Like there are times that I'm looking at the clock and it's like, dude, it's been 2 hours. Like you either didn't eat enough when you ate, or you're just tricking yourself into thinking that you want to go snack on some shit. And so, like, in my own experience, like time restrictions like that around food are really good anchors for me, really good boundaries. And that's just a real life example of what I'm working through right now.
I love that. Okay, so I'd like to question this a little bit here. Like, so you create the boundary, right? So you create the restriction. What is it giving you on the other side? So if you've sort of like controlled the area, controlled the behavior pattern with this boundary, there's sort of like a corresponding freedom that you get somewhere else in the training. So where's like the benefit of setting this boundary showing up? Because we don't want to just place rules on ourselves for the sake of having rules, because eventually we'll see those as arbitrary and then we'll rebel against the structure. We'll rebel against that boundary. So like, what are you gaining from setting that boundary around sort of the eating? Like where's the freedom? Where's the positive result that's coming out of you restraining this particular behavior?
I think the biggest thing that sticks out off the bat is like peace of mind. I'm not worried about how much I'm eating all day. I'm not worried about am I fueled for my workouts because like I'm consistently eating breakfast, um, lunch, and dinner. Generally 3 meals throughout the day right now is what I'm doing. And so for me, that's also letting me execute on my workouts a bit better. My runs are performing a lot better than usual. Because if I'm going through this, like, am I fasting? Am I not? It's like there's just not consistency. And so I think peace of mind is definitely one thing, but also like the freedom that it's giving me is like I feel a lot more in control of just like my physical form. So like I'm in control of my inflammation. I'm in control of like how full I am, right? I'm understanding more on how my digestive patterns roll, right? And it's also giving me more peace of mind around what I'm choosing to eat. Like I'm getting more clarity and more awareness on what meals feel good at a certain time of the day, right? Because now I've again got this like constraint that's giving me this framework to experiment and test. And so, like, for example, this week, one random new meal that I'm having that like I've never had before. Jack has been housing cottage cheese. So we've got a lot of cottage cheese in the house. And so I've been having cottage cheese with sliced up pear and honey and a sprinkle of cinnamon. And it's freaking amazing. Like literally one of the best tasting things I've ever had in my life. And yeah, I'm starting to understand like, okay, well, that's a little bit more of like a midday meal where it's like it's not crazy heavy, right? Like I'm not having like a massive bowl of like rice and ground beef. It's also helping me understand and give me peace of mind around like portion sizing too, right? Because I am definitely someone who can easily gravitate to like just housing a massive plate or bowl of food. Um, but then also with like kind of that eating around the clock that I've done, like there's just not awareness to like I do feel full, but then all of a sudden, like a couple hours later, I'm still eating anyway. So yeah, I don't know. Those are some of the things that stick out.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's like the peace of mind, you can't really even put like a measurement on what that brings to you. Like free from stress, free from worrying about this. And then now that you're not worried about it, you've got this exploration, you've got this creativity. I'm trying new meals, I'm experimenting because I've created a hard boundary on the outside, which also, right, and this is really important for us to recognize, once we create the hard boundary on the outside, we now have total freedom within the boundary. We have total freedom within the boundary to make what we need work for us, right? And when we were talking about this last week, just sort of to prep out what we wanted to talk about on the cafe, I made the mention of it's just like any sport, right? And I'm the sport philosopher, so it's natural that I do this. Every single sport requires rules. You cannot have sport without an inbounds and an out of bounds. And it's like, we'll just take soccer because I was a soccer player growing up. So you've got your entire pitch, right? And then within the pitch, there are certain rules about what you can and can't do. Like, so if I'm the goalie, I can handle the ball, but only within a particular space. And when I'm outside of that boundary, I can't handle the ball. Or if I'm an offending player, I can't go behind the defense if I'm on their side. So there's all these little rules that define what I can and what I can't do. But within all of those rules, I'm free to do whatever I want, right? I'm free to, I can head the ball, I can knee the ball, like I can pass backwards, I can go for a long pass. Like I have so much creativity at my disposal once I internalize the boundaries that check my action. And it's the same thing with something like I'm not going to eat 3 hours in between my meals, which means inside of my meals, I've got this freedom to experiment, be creative, and figure out what's going to work exactly for me. So I wanted to draw out that connection between a rule, a boundary, and the corresponding freedom we get when we stick with the hard boundary that we set for ourselves.
Yeah, I think one of the thing that I've realized is prior to this implementation of this 3 hour rule, I had been very focused on like pairing my carb intake with my training output, right? Like the more training you do, the higher intensity training you do, the more carbs that your body is using, so the more carbs you need. But if you're not really doing a lot of hard training, or if your training volume is low, maybe you're eating lighter carbs or less carbs, and it's been nice for me to just like mentally detach from that. Like the standard breakfast that I've been having is like 5 eggs with a couple of slices of sourdough. And it's like, it doesn't really matter if I had morning swim or if I'm doing something later in the day or when I'm running, right? Um, so a little bit of a detachment from that. And yeah, I mean, the creativity example, I mean, new meals coming in for me, like that's a direct result of that. So yeah, good parallel. We also were saying something along the lines of like, I mean, it's right in line with creativity, but just like the ability to play once there is a container and once there is a boundary. And once we do have this space that's only for this thing when we're thinking about training, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that idea of like inbounds, out of bounds that really determines play. I'm also a musician. So for me, it's like playing music. Music is a mathematical formula. There's 8 notes and there's 6 semitones in between the notes, right? And within that 14 notes and all the different rhythmic patterns that you can have, right? You can make an almost an endless amount of music, right? But that doesn't change the fact there's only 8 notes, right? And 6 semitones. But within those, we've got total freedom. So the rules give us the ability. Like if I was playing a guitar and the guitar didn't have frets and it didn't have six strings, like how am I able to maneuver around the guitar in order to get the sounds that I want? Like I need the boundaries. The boundaries create the potential for play. Go back to that, like watching our kids when they're playing, like an analogy, which I just think is just so powerful. Like they have a direct boundary between the real world and the play world, and it's usually ignoring your voice. So it's like, hey, my daughter's named Lily. Lily, we need you to stop that. Can you go and, clean up your dishes? Can you go brush your teeth? Nothing. Doesn't even hear it. She's created this hard boundary between like the real world and the play world. And the play world is like the most serious place for her. But without that boundary between what mom and dad want her to do and being completely enveloped in the activity, right? She doesn't have that ability to be exploratory, creative, imaginary. We kind of have to let her be and let her dictate what that's going to be. And she's the one that's put up the hard boundary. And effectively, what we're doing is we're reinforcing that boundary to give her space when we just, go up to your room, close the door. We won't even look at you for the next hour type of thing. And then to go in and to see what she's doing, it's like she's created a story with like eight of her stuffies, and like it's incredible just to see what she can do with a little bit of freedom within a particular boundary. So from my vantage, I want everybody to just be thinking about when we set rules for ourselves and we set the appropriate rules, we actually create the ability for us to have this freedom of action that we desire in a responsible way that moves us towards the goals that we want to achieve. So it's all about calibrating the boundary to you, what works and fits with you, so that you get this openness, which is why I really liked what you said about peace of mind. Like, if we're super stressed all the time, how are we ever going to be able to enjoy the present moment of whatever it is that we're doing? We're going to be anxious, we're going to be nervous, we're going to be worried about the past, we're going to be stressing out about the future. So creating the proper boundaries removes stress, removes the anxiety that comes with too many choices, and really like frees us up in all the right ways that we're hoping.
Yeah, and what you're sharing there, on freeing up the stress, to me, that's just like right back to the idea of the energy leak. And this is a visual that we'll be sharing on the symposium, but this idea of basically the brick wall. And the brick wall provides the foundational pieces of what's basically defending us against our lower self in a way, right? Big soy, trying to have us accept complacency, accept settling, and the cracks and the mortar between the bricks, like these are the things that we're looking to fill, right? And so that's a visual that we'll be sharing on the team call this coming week. But I wanted to bring this back to the idea of building momentum, right? Because at this time of the year, right, it's early March, weather's turning, right? People are starting to get their mojo back a little bit, and I think that one thing um, that sticks out about boundaries is what we're sacrificing to create them, and what we're really giving up on the front end is flexibility, right? So like to me, it's like there's this level of self-deception where it's like, oh, I could do my training at any time of the day. I could do it in the morning, I could do it midday, I could do it in the evening, right? And then all of a sudden that flexibility, right? It's back to the idea that you said of too many options. It's too many options, right? And so if we are somebody who's looking to reclaim a bit of momentum, like we do need these defined boundaries and these containers. Um, and that's going to require us giving up this idea that we can do whatever we want, right? Because if we have too many options, we're likely paralyzed by the multitude of choices. And yeah, I think that was the theme from the December call, maybe the January one on sacrifice. If you're not feeling like you're making enough progress towards your goals, you're likely not sacrificing enough. And I was actually just talking to an athlete this morning who recently just left their corporate job, and they're actually in the phase right now where it's like they have unlimited freedom. And they said that they're getting to the end of the day some days and they're like, I feel like I didn't do anything. And it's like, okay, well, we need the boundaries on the non-negotiable time. We need the structure a little bit so that within those we can play.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We tend to focus again, like, what are we giving up? What are we sacrificing? And what's the negative cost of giving up that flexibility? Well, it means that when I say I got to do it, I actually got to do it. And I can't BS my way into excuses and false rationalizations and justifications as to why I'm just not showing up when I say I'm supposed to show up. Again, too much freedom. Too much freedom without responsibility is chaos. Like, I'm just going to repeat that. Freedom without responsibility is chaos, and it's not freedom. It's not a freedom that any of us want. Okay. We need responsibility. We need to have the container. We need to have that boundary. And yeah, we give up some flexibility. Yeah, we give up maybe some time. We give up some decision, some ability to make a decision. But what do we gain? What do we gain on the other side? So when we're thinking about setting up boundaries, and especially boundaries that will help us establish momentum, don't think about the negative of what we're giving up. Think about the positive of what we get to add in once we stick with the boundary. So if it's something like, I need to get my training in the morning, right? The boundary of going to sleep at X time, right? Oh, okay, so I have to give up some of the doom scrolling, or I've got to give up maybe some of the late night snacking, ding, 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 right? In order to get to bed earlier. Okay, well, what does that give me the freedom to do? It gives me the freedom to get up and train with high energy at a time where I'm not taking away from my other obligations and responsibilities. And then once I've finished that, sort of like your examples of, Matt Bank and John Herman, getting it done in the morning, it's like, well, then the rest of my day is free. So I can serve my family, so I can go to work, like, and be the killer that I need to be there. And I can come home and be totally satisfied in all of the output that I've done that day. So again, we give something up, and if the sacrifice doesn't lead us to that positive vision of what we want to achieve, we're going to rebel against that. So again, we're not just setting up boundaries because people who have success set boundaries. It's like we set boundaries for particular reasons. We're setting boundaries for particular aims, right? Because if these are not aligned with the deeper vision or the purpose of or the meaning of why we're doing what we're doing, we are eventually going to rebel against those boundaries. We'll see them as arbitrary, we'll see them as punitive, we'll see them as restrictive on our freedom, as opposed to them aiding our freedom. Okay, so it's very important that these boundaries are tied in with that larger vision, with that why that pulls you in. So it's like, if your why to do the 70.3 is to establish healthy habits so that I can better lead my family, it doesn't make any sense then if the boundaries that you're setting on that journey take you away from your family. Right? There's a counterproductive boundary for the ultimate aim. And it's like, well, maybe it helps get you across one finish line, maybe, but it's not helping you realize that vision of yourself that you want when you do something this difficult and you put so much time into it. So the boundaries have to work in the direction that you're aiming with the sacrifices. Otherwise, they will feel like prisons. All of these boundaries will eventually start to feel like prisons. So that's a really important thing to highlight and clarify, I think.
Yeah, and I think that the two words that I shared earlier, like clarity and certainty, like when you're giving up the idea of flexibility, well, you're acquiring clarity and certainty, right? And then when we're talking about bringing this back to like leadership in the home and getting your people on board with you doing all of this, um, those are the things that like permeate and radiate off of you, right? And the people around you start to realize and just naturally sense like, oh man, Ryan's like really clear on what he's doing and why he's doing it, and he's really certain on when he's doing it. And all of a sudden that's allowing him to then do these other things for the family and show up differently and show up more powerfully and more authentically. And that's like the orbit that I'm really looking to encourage everybody to fall into. Like that's my goal with every athlete, is that this doesn't become a, oh, I had to give up everything in my life and I did this 70.3 in an unsustainable way. To me, it's like I want to help everybody really like step into their power as leaders of themselves and of their family. And I think that it's been cool that there have been some like common words that have stuck out from different points of this conversation that have kept repeating themselves. And yeah, I know that there's certain people that this maybe doesn't super apply for because they're like nailing this stuff already. But I know there's a lot of people on the team that it's like they're in this phase where like this stuff is really what they're looking for most. And it's almost more important than like the tactical training at this point for them.
For sure. And even for people who are, let's say, on the higher end of setting boundaries up for themselves, like maybe you're good with sort of like the physical boundaries, but I bet you there are some onerous boundaries you're placing on yourselves that are punitive or restrictive. You're sort of setting yourself up for future rebellion, kind of like against yourself, acting as a tyrant or an authoritarian over the rules that aren't necessarily aligning you towards that higher vision of yourself. So people who are nailing boundaries right now, I would challenge you to think about a way in which a boundary that's working for you right now might actually become a prison. Similar to this idea of, phase one, phase two, phase three that we talked about in the last cafe. Like something that's working for you right now could in the future become an impediment to you reaching the next step, right? So if it's something like I can only train in the morning and that's my hard boundary, but something happens, right? And all of a sudden that morning time is gone for you. Are you going to be able to adapt? You're going to be able to create a new boundary, right? That is as effective. So I just want to encourage everybody to, no matter if you're at the low level, the high level, anywhere in between, this relationship between boundary, responsibility, and freedom, none of us are impervious to that. Like no matter how dialed in we think we are. So I would consider people to think conceptually about boundaries that are working for me. Maybe they're working against me. How can I better clarify which boundaries are the ones that are really moving the needle for me, and which are the ones I'm just sort of putting around myself because they look good? And we're all kind of guilty of that when it comes to putting these guardrails on our behavior.
I think one example of more of like a mental boundary, I think I sort of alluded to wanting to share some mental boundaries in the beginning of this. One really powerful one is putting a boundary on who you are following on social. Um, and if you're somebody who is following and your feed is filled with things that are inciting like anger in you, if they're consuming all of your attention, if it's becoming a way for you to like be influenced by the external world in ways that you don't want to be, in ways that aren't aligned with this purpose, right? That we're always bringing this back to. I would say that that's a great way for anybody to improve. And that's been a really tactical thing that's really helped me over the past couple of years of like auditing my Twitter feed. Like, what accounts am I following? Like, are these accounts putting out positive stuff? Are they putting out, doom and gloom type of information that's like sucking me in? And all of a sudden it's becoming an energy leak. And all of a sudden, like my peace of mind is being taken away. And all of a sudden I'm getting distracted from the overall goal of like becoming the best person that I can be and leading my family as powerfully as I'm capable of being and capable of becoming.
Yeah, boundaries around information, boundaries around consumption, boundaries around relationships, you know, not getting into certain conversations with certain people because you know they are dead end streets. You know, boundaries around our peace are maybe the most important boundaries that we can set because they allow us to handle stress, right? So if I want to train for 2 hours and I also want to show up for my family and I want to be a killer at my job, there's only so much stress I can handle. And if I'm overloading myself with useless stress that isn't moving the needle in those sort of like three areas where I really want to make progress, well, then I'm not able to train as hard. I'm not able to be as patient with my kids when they're screaming at me, right? Which is a big one. That's a big one. Uh, right. Or I'm not able to just like put my head down and grind through the work that I don't want to do, but I know is necessary for me to be successful. Right. So guarding our peace might be the most important boundary that we can set up, right? And you know, Ryan's talking about energy leaks. We talk about energy vampires, people who legitimately steal your life force out of you with their negativity, with their cynicism, with their jaded attitude, not just towards the world, but towards you and your goals. You know, people don't like it if you're somebody that's establishing a new habit, like getting up early and kicking out these awesome workouts before other people are even like moving in their bed before they're even getting up, like they're not going to appreciate that. They're not going to appreciate you holding up a mirror to their bad habits with your good habits. And so that's another place where boundaries are important. You know, I was talking with you know, my guy here before, and it's like we notice, you know, when we are in situations with other people, the snide comments come out about like, oh, why are you choosing to go do this? Like, don't you think you've worked out enough? Like, come on, dude. Like, and it's like you can let those get to you, or you can choose to basically have this impenetrable boundary where it's like whatever you say is really not aimed at me. You're aiming it at yourself and you're trying to cope and make yourself feel better. So my boundary just reflects that negativity. That stupid snide remark that you just said doesn't even phase me because I'm confident that what I'm doing inside of my boundary is way more fulfilling than anything that you're going to try to get me to do outside of the boundary because you're tempting me with this negative energy. And I want to maintain inside the boundary is positive, is positivity, it's progress, it's willingness to do the hard things that the other people on the outside of my boundary they are not willing to do.
Yeah, like building off of that, I think that two really powerful examples are putting boundaries on your own speaking. So one thing I was chatting on an athlete with this week was how do we create more peace in our daily life? How do we establish more peace in the home? Well, holding our tongue and not just reacting and spitting out the first thing that comes to mind in any kind of stressful situation. And in my own life, what I've experienced is that the more that I hold my tongue, the more that I remain in control of my emotional state. And one thing I've also learned is that negativity, it really needs something to latch onto. And if negativity is thrown your way, if anger and stress and aggression is thrown your way, you speaking back and like participating in that, that's you allowing it to latch onto you. So now all of a sudden you're into this dance with this emotional friction, right? And all of this stress. But if you can stay guarded and if you can have a boundary on your own spoken word, that negative energy will just go bother somebody else. And a recent real life example of that, we've got a hard rule in the dryer house that I've established over the past, probably about the past 18 months, is we do not allow any negative texting. So we, not necessarily just Chelsea and I, but like just in family dynamics, it had seemingly been a thing where it's like if somebody's frustrated with somebody, this paragraph text of all of these complaints, right? And we were preparing for this Belize trip a couple of weeks ago, and it was a little bit stressful leading into the trip because I was sick. Some other people in Chelsea's family were sick. We were expecting this snowstorm in Denver, and I wasn't worried about any of this stuff. But Chelsea's mom was like checking in on all of it. She's like texting Chelsea every so often, "How's Ryan doing?" And like it's coming from a place of love, but like kind of just bothering Chelsea. And to a certain point, Chelsea just said like, "I'll just see you in a day. Like I'm not entertaining this." And the situation just solved itself. And I was also talking to some other family members on like, okay, well, you've got this rule. Like, how do things get solved? And I'm like, well, most things just seem to solve themselves. Like the things that seem pent up and super stressful and super urgent now, well, if you don't give them energy and attention, like most things just take care of themselves. And if it's super important, well, it'll stay around and you'll be able to entertain it with a more level head. Um, so that's one, a boundary on speaking. I think another one is I hadn't really thought about it like this, but like a boundary on opinions. Like you don't need to have an opinion on every single different thing in the world. Like look at what we're trying to do here. Like we're trying to do things we've never done before. You and I are trying to run 100 miles, right? We're trying to do it with a team. We got guys here trying to do their first 70.3, right? We got guys training for their first Ironman. Like we're not going to be able to get this shit done if every single thing in the news, every single global event all of a sudden gets all of our attention. Oh, we think about this. Oh, this is coming up. Freaking this country shouldn't have done this. This leader doesn't know what he's doing. It's like, bro, focus on yourself and let's go. Lock in here, man. Like we only got so much attention. And if we're giving our freaking attention to every single thing in the world, then the attention we're bringing to ourself and our goals is limited and it's weak and it's freaking fragmented. And yeah, I think there's a really cool just like we're starting to string together some of these bricks that we can lay out, right? It's like one is like the physical boundaries around the training stuff. One is like maybe like the boundaries on the social feed. That's a really big one. One is also then like the boundaries on the speaking, the boundaries on opinions, like recognizing that like we can step back too. I think that's another thing that's sticking out to me right now is like sometimes the idea of a boundary, we visualize putting up a hard wall, right, between other things. And that's like what I even described with the brick wall concept. But sometimes a boundary can just be like, it's like that like stoic idea of like the inner citadel, right? It's like you internally are impenetrable. And all of these things that we're starting to stack up, like we're starting to build an impenetrable force of a human being who can conquer whatever they want, who carries themselves in a way that when they are pursuing their goals, the people around them, they know, okay, Ryan is doing this, and I trust Ryan to show up in this other way. So I'm going to grant him the space to take care of himself. And yeah, man, that's where my mind's going on this conversation.
Love this. Just a hit on the language thing and how that's related to freedom. So if you don't hold your tongue, right, and you act on the immediate emotion that comes to you in the moment, do you have freedom of action after you've made that decision? No, you're locked into whatever stupid like knee-jerk reaction you had, and now you either got to walk it back or you've got to like go down that road. But if you stop, pause, and you take your 10 seconds just to like audit the situation, you realize there's a lot of different ways that I could play this potential situation. And I'd actually like to play the card that is the most beneficial at this time. Like, so you gain this freedom of action through, establishing a boundary in that particular sense. One other thing I want to present here in terms of boundaries is boundaries are hard, but they also need to be like situational. And we actually want to sometimes lessen the boundary to bring in good information. So I'm thinking in particular of like a cell wall. And I'm not a biologist. So if I mess this up, please do not hammer me. I'm a philosopher. Okay. So I'm not a scientist. The cell wall locks out things that shouldn't get inside, but through osmosis will allow in beneficial things. Okay. So we kind of want our boundaries to be the same, right? So negative energy, boom. But you know what I do want? I want positive energy. So I'm not going to like have this hard ass boundary around like, oh, I'm never going to take praise, or I'm never going to, like it's just me and I'm stoic and that's this. And it's like, yeah, that's good. But we also want to be able to bring in positive influences. We want to learn, we want to grow, we want to be able to audit when we're not actually living up to what we say. So the boundaries need to kind of be both directions in a sense, where we are using the boundary to expel. Yes, beauty. Vision of a house is another perfect one. Your house has a front door, right? And you lock the damn front door, and you only decide which people get to come in and under what situations. And I live in a place where I don't need to lock my door, and don't tell my wife, but sometimes I don't. Don't listen to this, right? Because I'm not necessarily worried about somebody coming in, but if I did, right, well, then I've got the ability to make the boundary hard. It can be an open door or it can be a closed door, and that's depending on the context. So I love that analogy there, Grant. The house analogy, the cell analogy. People use this in terms of like a country with borders. Like boundaries are crucial in preserving our peace, in giving us the freedom to act in the ways that move us forward. And you just nailed it, man. You just nailed it with that house analogy. I love that. It's exactly what I'm trying to express here. So we want to bring in positivity, but we want to expel negativity, and we want to use the boundary to preserve our peace and our projection of ourselves forward.
Breaking news. I am warmed up. I'm warmed up. It took me a little while, but this last leg of the conversation here, one thing that really stuck out to me as you were sharing that first bit, Goldstein, on the cell and the osmosis, is we're talking about this visual, right, of playing a game, right? And there's the soccer field and there's the rules in it. But what I just thought of related to what I shared last was the idea of you can take yourself out of a game and you can take yourself out of other games. And this is the trap that I think a lot of people are stuck in these days, is that they're stuck playing the wrong games. They're stuck playing the political games. They're stuck playing the opinion games. They're stuck playing the games of the corporate ladder and the different relational things in the office. And it's like, bro, what is the game that you want to be playing in life? The game that I want to be playing is that I want to go out and I want to dominate. All right. And I want to do hard things with my body that turn my mind into an impenetrable force. And I want to use that to lead my family and build the life that I want and create freedom for my family. That's the game that I'm trying to play, dog. I'm not trying to get fucked around over here, dealing with other people's opinions, a bunch of nonsense stuff that's got me living some complacent life. I'm trying to play my own game. And so the boundaries that I'm creating allow me to do that. And I got no problem taking myself out of someone else's game. And if they're trying to come at me and tell me that I got to worry about the election, I don't give a fuck, dog. I'm over here trying to run 100 miles with a squad of savages. I'm trying to help my wife launch a business. I'm trying to homeschool Jack so he can become a killer. Let's go.
We aren't limited to the boundaries that other people place on us because they are limited in their understanding of the games that we should be playing in. So, establishing boundaries for ourselves is a proclamation of personal power, because what are we proclaiming? We're proclaiming I have freedom to act in a way that I determine for myself. And if the boundary is hard enough, then people can't break through it and they can't suck us down. And as somebody who literally came from the world of I guess you could call it politics, like the free speech stuff was how I kind of got into a lot of these things, and I still am a little bit plugged into those things, but I can't tell you how much I've consciously gotten out of that mode of thinking. The people I used to follow they're not even there. The things I used to consider important, I am not even sure of, like, and anymore. Things I told myself that I had to do in order to be a responsible, whatever, academic or somebody who is identified on this side of the aisle or that side of the aisle, it's like, now I don't care. Now I don't care, right? And one of the things, especially this is going to go out to people who are maybe bogged down in the politics stuff. Um, I've tried. I was at high levels trying to affect what we would consider political change, especially in like the university system with relationship to free speech and censorship. And I was in email chains and groups with the most powerful Canadian academics. Everybody is thinking of certain names. Let me tell you, they were in our email chain. I was talking with these people, personal correspondence. Do you know how much we affected? Zero. We didn't change a thing. And in fact, everything that we fought against is 10 times worse today. Okay. So all that energy, while it was good for me to learn about myself, did it actually move the needle in affecting the outcome? No, no. It actually, like, it didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. And so for me personally, if I'm interested in affecting political change, the game that everyone's trying to get me to play is the game of legislation and laws and parties and boosters and whatever it is. And it's like, no, the game I want to play is creating revolution from the bottom up. I want to individualize the political process. So I don't need to change society. I need to change my family, right?
Mm.
I need my family to work the way I think it should. And that's going to create a ripple. We talk so much about the ripple effect, right? I'm going to use my political change individually to create a ripple effect in society where other individuals link up and we create constellations as opposed to these like directed movements, which, let's face it, they're not going to really work. Okay. So if we want to create societal change, the game to really play is the individual game. We change ourselves first, then we actually have the ability and the power to bring people along because they'll see that our game is the one that gets the results as opposed to the game that they're trying to play, which is, let's just face it, it's a rig game. No matter what side you play for, doesn't matter to me. It's a rig game, right? So we need to get out of those limiting external games and realize that the change comes from within ourselves, whether that's political, personal, familial, career wise, relationship, it doesn't matter. We're the ones in control. We get to determine the game. We get to set up the boundaries. And therefore, we get to determine the outcomes in a sense, like for ourselves. And if that doesn't get you excited, yeah, man, I don't know. Because I'm jazzed up about this. I love it. I love this.
What an incredible direction this call has taken. Huge idea of artistic inspiration, tribal constellations. I would like to create something where it's like each race or each experience, some kind of constellation image is made with some kind of draw up of maybe the people included or the overall race or something like that. But yeah, man. So we basically started with this with talking about like boundaries around time and thinking about training, right? And then this evolved into boundaries around your mindset and what information you take in, right? And then boundaries around language, boundaries around opinions, and now we've really arrived at like you need to create boundaries that allow you to play the game of life that you want to play. And that's just beautiful, man. This is so spot on.
I mean, that's what we're trying to achieve here. We're not trying to live like everybody else. Okay. We see what that life is. We see that it's not what moves the needle for us. That might be okay for other people. Okay. And what's important for us to, let's go, Trevor. Let's in order for us to really like believe that we have this power, right? We also have to take the power away from everybody else, right? So the serious things that everybody says are the things that we need to be paying attention to. No, this is like why the saying play is serious, work is the distraction is just so valuable. all the things that everybody says you should be paying attention to, they're not the things that move you forward individually. They're the things that keep you stuck playing those stupid social games that are related to things like status, reputation, superficiality. Okay?
Mm.
We want to play our own games. And once we establish that play is the serious element of life, and that we understand that play cannot exist without boundaries, it cannot exist without boundaries, well, then we should be really excited to be setting up boundaries for ourselves because they give us that condition to play, which is going to lead us to the serious changes that we want to see occur in our life. But if we focus on the stupid distractions, the serious work stuff, politics, career orientation, not that we don't want to have good careers, obviously, but we don't want to work ourselves dry for somebody else's vision necessarily without realizing something for ourselves.
Dude, and something that's just so true, I feel like, is when you are stuck playing somebody else's game, you show up inauthentically. So I'm thinking about like the corporate games, and I'm just thinking about the way that people write emails. Hey, didn't know if you had a chance to look at this. Like you're just showing up so inauthentically, you're showing up so passively. And it's like, what kind of qualities are we embodying when we're playing our own game? We're showing up with clear direction, right? We're upfront, right? We're charging towards our goals rather than this tiptoeing around and this freaking social status game. Um, inauthenticity versus just showing up authentically. I just feel like that to me just was based on what you just said there. Like and that's like the internal conflict then that like people are living with. It's like if we're not playing the game that we want to be playing, we're playing somebody else's game. It's very challenging to be, I don't know, can you even show up authentically playing someone else's game? I don't know. You're playing by somebody else's rules, right? And this is the power I want people to step into, is that you can create your own rules, man. You can create your own rules. You can you don't need to play chess or checkers. You can create your own board, man. You can play Catan, dog. Let's go. This board looks totally different. Man, we're building shit. We're building roads, man. Longest road. Let's go.
Exactly right. But the important thing is no matter yeah, build the longest road. But the important thing to know, just because we get to define the game doesn't make the rules less serious and doesn't mean we get to waver on them. We actually have to be more attentive to the rules and we have to take them more seriously because there's more resistance, there's more outside conflict that's going to come in and batter itself against our boundary that we're trying to put up against the pressures of the external world. So if we truly desire to play our own game, boundaries are non-negotiable and they've got to be hard and we've got to be damn ass accountable to them, like for ourselves. Otherwise nobody else is going to come in and enforce these boundaries for us because we're the ones who are creating them. So it puts additional responsibility, it puts additional pressure on us to show up for ourselves. But on the other side, it's like what? Self-actualization, realizing the divine gift, stepping into your purpose. Like, put a price on that shit. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that to me connects back to like this little 3 hour rule that I've got right now with my nutrition. It's like, listen, I need some kind of constraint. I need it. I need it because I know when I don't have it, I'm liable to start fucking around. Right? I know myself, right? I know what I'm liable to do. Um, so yeah, it's like this idea of like, okay, well, yeah, we can create our own game, we can play our own game, but like that doesn't mean that we're just out in a field with a ball, nothing to fucking do, right? There's no goal, there's no inbounds, there's no out of bounds, there's no center line, there's no offsides, right? What fun is that? Just kicking it around, you'll be there for 2 seconds and be like, I need something to make this harder. I need something to make this harder. This isn't hard
Yeah.
enough, right?
Rules and boundaries give us the limitations. Like, that's the definition of a game. A game is placing obstacles in the way of achieving whatever goal it is, and then actually actually limiting yourself to the obstacles, right? So it's like soccer only works if everyone decides that they're not going to handle the ball, right? If one person just decides to pick up the ball and start running, right? Then you're not playing that game anymore, and you've got to figure it out. And there's a really interesting history between the split between soccer and rugby, which is kind of like that. One group of people decided to pick up the ball and run with it, and the other side decided not to, and then they split off.
Well, to me, what I'm
Effectively,
thinking of right there is like, okay, so this Chattanooga group, Chattanooga 78.3, it's like nobody's just getting to play this game by the rules of, oh, no corporate job, no family responsibilities. Like, no one's getting to do that. No. The rules are that you still got to show up and do whatever you're doing professionally. You still got to show up as a husband and as a father, right? Like, these are the rules. Okay. Well, now it's thinking about the boundaries. Well, if my responsibilities for my family start at 7 a.m. and my responsibilities for my job start at 9 a.m., looks like I got to get shit done before then. Otherwise, I'm getting owned by this game. I'm not winning this game. And I'm stressed and I'm worried and I'm leaking mental energy all day thinking about it. When in reality, I just need a little bit of a firmer boundary.
yeah, it's exactly right. Like without the difficulty, there is no game and there is no fun. And so think about like these boundaries as ways to find the fun too. So it's like, yeah, it's not super enjoyable to be getting up early, but you know what's really fun about that? You're the only one up. Like it's not the common thing that everybody else is doing. You're kind of like out there on your own, forging a way forward and looking back and seeing, hey, there just ain't many people behind me and there ain't many people in front of me. I'm out here on my own and I'm really living it. Like, and that exhilaration of the challenge is what can give you fun. Like I think about this a lot in terms of like a video game, for example, right? What's the most fun kind of a video game to play? Is it the one where you just flawlessly like go through the levels and there's no chance you're ever gonna fail and it's just so easy, right? That everything just comes to you. Like that's fun maybe for 2 or 3 times, and then you turn it off and you never played it because there's no challenge, right? Similarly, if it's like that Mario like image that gives everybody anxiety, where it's like, how does he even find his way through all those like crazy things? If it's too hard, you're just going to quit because you're never going to see yourself succeeding. We want the right relationship between the difficulty, the rules, and our ability to challenge them, right? So this is why setting your boundaries up in a way that's contextual to you is so important. They can't be so lax that it doesn't matter if you stick to them or you don't stick to them. But they also can't be so rigid that they create this inability for you to breathe, right? So really think about this idea of like, what's the most fun game? It's one where I'm consistently being challenged a little bit more each and every level, and I'm able to rise up and meet it. And then I've got a new one. Just like literally just think of that Mario game and how you go from world to world to world. It just gets like a little bit harder and a little bit harder and a little bit harder. And that keeps you playing the game until the end, wanting to go rescue the princess and beat Bowser.
Beautiful, dude. I have been holding in a pee for probably 15 minutes, and we're about at time here, and Jack's about to wake up from his nap. So I think that this is a great time to call it, man. What a beautiful just embodiment of what we want these cafes to be, right? We had a little bit of direction, but let's just start chatting on it and see where we go. So thank you so much
Absolutely.
for the exploration and the emergence, Goldstein, and thanks for Grant, Cameron, and Trevor for joining here. Really, really excited to launch this one, publish it, and build off of this in the symposium.
Can I just add one
See you
thing for
guys.
this?
So yeah,
Awesome.
Goldstein, go
Thanks,
ahead.
Cam. Just for the symposium. So if we're trying to think about what we want to bring to the symposium for the people who want to participate, think about boundaries, thinking about what are the boundaries I can be setting up now to help reestablish or gain momentum. Or if you're somebody who's like, I'm really good with boundaries, think about like what are some ways in which the current boundaries I have may be setting myself up for a little bit of a fall. So think about those kind of elements
A
as
little
like these
pin that
loose
I'll
prompts.
a little pin that I'll drop is that like I definitely have gone through phases where I need different boundaries. And then the boundaries that
Yes.
I have for a little while, they stop serving me. And a good example right now is like I have been over the past 3 months or so, I've been like starting almost every single day with reading the Bible. And that's like a firm boundary for me, is it's like, okay, I'm not entertaining anything else in the world until I do this. But I've also been feeling this little sense inside lately that it's like I want to be clarifying some of my ideas more. And some of the content that I'm creating, I'm like, I've really, really just like gone on autopilot on creating content. I'm just like documenting what I do. I'm not really sharing my ideas. I'm like, and so this morning, literally morning one of a new boundary is I started writing before reading the Bible. And so we'll see as I reorient these things, but it's like I knew I needed a change. So now like I still have that container of space, but it's like used differently. And so I'll let that marinate until the symposium conversation.
Perfect. Exactly like that.
Beautiful. All right. Thanks so much, dude. We'll talk soon.
Peace and love. Let's get it, team.